My villa in Tuscany wasn't just a house. It was the sacred ground where my wife and I had built our dreams, raised our children, and planned to spend our golden years. Every stone, every cypress tree, every breathtaking sunset held a piece of our shared history. It was our sanctuary, intended to be passed down through generations, a legacy of love and family. Then, my own daughter, Leda, committed the ultimate betrayal. She didn't just take it, she ripped it from my hands and with a chilling smile handed it over to her husband's family, a family who had always treated me with thinly veiled contempt. I remember the day with sickening clarity. I had entrusted the villa to Leda for a summer, hoping she and my grandchildren would make new memories there. Instead, she invited Julian's entire sprawling family. I flew over for a surprise visit, dreaming of a joyful reunion. What I found was a nightmare. Julian's loud, boisterous relatives were everywhere, treating my beloved home like a cheap rental, their raucous laughter echoing where my wife's gentle voice once sang. When I confronted Leda, her face hardened. "Oh, Dad, they love it here. Julian's parents are thinking of making it their permanent summer home." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about, Leda? This is my home. It's for our family." She looked at me with an icy indifference I barely recognized, her voice laced with a condescension that cut deeper than any knife. "Dad, be realistic. You're getting old. Julian's family deserves a place like this. It's theirs now." Sound of a sharp, devastating crack, like something precious breaking. Her words weren't just a theft, they were a complete erasure of my existence, my legacy, my very right to my own home. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. But beneath the pain, a cold, burning ember of vengeance ignited. They wanted my villa? Oh, they would get it, but they would get a lot more than they bargained for.
That evening, after Leda's contemptuous declaration, I didn't cause a scene. I simply smiled. A cold, polite smile that hid the raging inferno inside me. I knew then that any direct argument was useless. Leda and Julian saw me as a relic, easily discorded. They had misjudged me entirely. They forgot that the man who built a successful manufacturing business from nothing also knew how to dismantle a threat, silently and completely. This phase was the build-up, the calculated construction of my revenge. The paper trail of lies. The Tuscan villa was in my name, but the documents Leda mentioned, the ones she claimed gave Julian's parents access, were the first thread I pulled. I realized Leda hadn't merely let them stay, she had started the process of transferring the power of attorney over the property, twisting my occasional reliance on her during my wife's illness into a permanent weapon. She was trying to legally steal the house right out from under me. I immediately flew back home and called my lawyer, the only person I trusted absolutely, a shrewd, quiet woman named Alara. I presented Alara with the evidence of Leda's financial recklessness and Julian's escalating arrogance. I revealed the history, how Julian, a failed property developer, had always used Leda's connection to me to secure loans and flaunt a wealth he didn't possess. I then gave Alara the first crucial document, the original, irrevocable trust I had established for the villa 20 years ago. The trust stated explicitly that the title of the property could never be transferred or sold while I was alive, and upon my death, it would pass directly to my wife's charity, with Leda receiving only the residual income. "But Dad, I signed the documents," Leda had told me years ago when I set it up. I had nodded, knowing she hadn't bothered to read the fine print, only concerned with the immediate tax advantages I promised. Leda and Julian had built their greedy fantasy on the assumption the villa was freely transferable upon my eventual death. They never imagined I had locked it down decades ago. Julian's fatal mistake. Julian's involvement was my second and easier target. He was all ego and credit card debt. I used my manufacturing firm's resources to run a deep background check. The findings were sickeningly predictable. Julian was facing an imminent bankruptcy filing and was secretly siphoning money from his father's struggling construction firm, the very father Leda had tried to install in my villa. He wasn't just stealing my house, he was collapsing his own family's foundation. He was the perfect, arrogant pawn. Leda, blinded by the dream of an aristocratic life with Julian, had become a co-conspirator in my isolation. She stopped taking my calls, delegating my needs to an impersonal home care agency she hired remotely, hoping I would simply fade away and let the POA go through. "We're just so busy, Dad. Julian needs me to network for his new deal," was her standard, dismissive text. The injustice of it all, the cold calculation of their neglect, fueled my resolve. I had raised Leda with everything, and she repaid me with such callousness. The second signature. My lawyer Alara advised the next step. To completely sabotage Leda's illegal POA transfer, I had to solidify the villa's status and show Leda I was still firmly in control. I drafted a document, an official notice of intent to occupy and restructure trust. This letter served legally to Julian's family currently occupying the villa, gave them 72 hours to vacate the premises before I arrived with a local court order. But the real genius was the accompanying document, a harmless-looking paper titled Revision to Emergency Contact Information. I asked Leda to sign it and mail it back, claiming my new home care worker needed the updated details. I even included a small, sincere note, "I miss you, sweetheart. Call me when you get a moment." Leda, seeing a quick, easy task and the promise of future money once the villa was theirs, signed the sheet without reading the minuscule print above the signature line. That inconspicuous signature block was actually for a temporary revocation of financial authority. It didn't affect her status as my daughter, but it legally blocked her from accessing or controlling any of my assets until I formally reinstated her. She had just signed away the ability to complete the transfer she desperately needed. The emotional weight of this meticulous planning was heavy. I wasn't just planning revenge, I was severing ties with the only child I had left. But Leda's words echoed back. It's theirs now. They deserved what was coming. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the confrontation.
The aftermath of that phone call was precisely the climax I'd orchestrated. Julian, realizing his golden goose had just signed away the farm and that his fiancée, Leda, was not even a biological heir to the full estate, erupted. The desperation in his voice during their shouted argument, which I knew my lawyer had legally recorded, confirmed everything. He hadn't loved Leda. He had loved the villa, the status, and the vast wealth he thought would come with it. When Leda realized her father, the man she had dismissed as old and pathetic, had been meticulously planning this moment for decades, she didn't apologize. She panicked, turning her venom onto Julian. Julian immediately initiated divorce proceedings, citing the adoption secret and Leda's subsequent lack of major inheritance as the foundation of his betrayal. He wanted out before his own family's financial collapse, which I also ensured was exposed via an anonymous tip to his father's creditors, dragged him under. My revenge was multi-layered. The villa was safe, Julian was facing personal and professional ruin, and Leda was left with nothing but a ruined marriage and the harsh realization of her own greed. The Tuscan villa, my sacred ground, was immediately signed over to the Honest Tradesman Vocational Foundation, honoring my late wife's charitable wishes and ensuring that the wealth Leda sought to steal would instead benefit people dedicated to honest work, a direct contrast to her and Julian's opportunistic nature. I didn't need a shouting match or a physical confrontation. I needed a clean, undeniable legal victory that weaponized their own greed against them. Watching their meticulously constructed world of lies and entitlement crumble through a single 20-year-old legal document was the most satisfying form of justice I could imagine. They had tried to steal my future. I had quietly dismantled their entire foundation. That sudden silence after I hung up wasn't peace. It was the calm before the storm. Julian and Leda had just realized their entire future, their gilded fantasy, had been reduced to ashes by a document I signed 2 decades ago. The real climax wasn't just the eviction, it was the fallout that followed, the moment I made sure they faced the consequences of their own decisions, with 0 chance of recovery. The immediate implosion. Julian, the narcissist, always prioritized self-preservation. The moment he realized the villa was locked down and Leda was legally worthless to him, he turned on her with a viciousness that confirmed my worst fears about their relationship. He didn't just demand a divorce, he did it publicly, citing Leda's failure to secure the inheritance and, most importantly, leveraging the adoption secret I had just revealed. Julian's lawyer, a slick vulture, argued that the premise of their marriage, securing access to the vast family wealth, had been fraudulently misrepresented. Leda, caught in the spotlight, became a pariah not because she was adopted, but because her entire identity was tied to an entitlement that was now proven false. Meanwhile, Julian's own financial world was collapsing. Remember that anonymous tip I mentioned? I sent the detailed report of his embezzlement from his father's construction firm, the very report Alara, my lawyer, had meticulously compiled, straight to the firm's board of directors. Suddenly, Julian wasn't just broke, he was facing a criminal investigation and a civil lawsuit from his own family. The irony was brutal. The very people Leda tried to gift my villa to were the ones Julian had been stealing from all along. His desperation to grab my assets was a direct result of the hole he'd dug for himself. He wanted my villa to save his skin, but I ensured he lost his career, his family connection, and his freedom instead. The villa's true destiny. While Julian and Leda were consumed in their dramatic public implosion, I executed the final, elegant step. I didn't just hold on to the villa, I honored my wife's wishes and immediately transferred the property title to the Honest Tradesman Vocational Foundation. The contrast was a work of art. While Julian was being interviewed by police and Leda was crying over their ruined reputation, the Tuscan villa was being cleaned, painted, and repurposed. The property they wanted to use for lavish parties and status signaling was instantly transformed into a school. The grounds where Julian's family had laughed drunkenly were now filled with quiet, dedicated young men and women learning carpentry, stonework, and artisan skills, the very skills that built and maintained that beautiful villa in the first place. I flew to Italy myself for the official handover. I stood on the terrace, watching the first group of students carefully tending the cypress trees. The air was calm, respectful, and filled with a sense of honest purpose. The villa was finally fulfilling its destiny, becoming a legacy of giving, not taking. This was the ultimate victory, taking a symbol of their greed and turning it into a beacon of my wife's genuine compassion. No tears, just documents. I never faced Leda in court. I didn't have to. The truth was delivered through notarized documents and court filings. Leda had signed the documents, she had verbally declared the house was theirs, and she had demonstrated a pattern of financial irresponsibility. When her divorce was finalized, she was left with nothing but her clothes and a mountain of joint debt Julian had skillfully offloaded onto her. The small annuity I had intended for her was now tied up in the courts because of the revocation document she signed, a financial and legal knot that would take her years to untangle. My revenge was perfect because it was reactive. I didn't actively destroy them, I simply allowed their own selfish acts, Leda's entitlement, and Julian's criminality to become the instruments of their destruction. They had tried to steal my life. I used the paper trail of their greed to erase their future. As I watched the sun set over the hills of Tuscany that evening, I felt no anger, only a profound, cold satisfaction. The villain was vanquished, and the legacy was secure. But the story of Leda was still not over. Her journey from privileged daughter to penniless castaway was just beginning.
The dust settled, but the silence was still deafening. The climax had been satisfying, surgical, and complete. Julian was facing a lengthy legal battle from his own family's board, a direct result of my anonymous tip and his own documented theft. He would be ruined. But my true emotional resolution lay with Leda. I never wanted Leda to suffer, but I needed her to learn. I reached out one last time, a few months after her swift, humiliating divorce, sending her a short, non-negotiable letter. I told her I had paid off the remainder of her student loans, the last piece of financial assistance I would ever offer her. The gesture was a small finality, a checkmark on my ledger of responsibility. I wasn't doing it out of forgiveness, but out of a need for closure. I needed her out of my life, untainted by the financial leverage I held over her. Leda never responded. The silence from her was, perhaps, her own acknowledgement of the deep chasm she had created. Her privilege had been her greatest weakness. Raised with everything, she believed the world, and my villa, was a resource to be consumed, not cherished. She had to learn that true value lies not in what you inherit, but what you earn. My friends, the moral of this story is etched in granite. Never underestimate the power of quiet preparation. Julian and Leda believed I was blind, deaf, and nearing my end. They missed the most important detail. The old man who built the fortune often knows the best ways to defend it. Greed is a blinding fog. It made them arrogant. It made them careless, and ultimately it led them to sign the very documents that destroyed their future. My revenge wasn't loud, it was simply the inevitable consequence of their own actions. I gave them enough rope, and they hanged their own entitlement.